All right. Anyone else who trickles in can join us in progress. My name is Andy Purcell. I think I've met most of you in the past at events. I am a business consultant here, so working on the front side of things here at TCS, and looking forward to talking a bit today about building a resilient security framework. So as we go through, it will be somewhat conversational as I discuss some of the topics as we go. The first portion of it will relate to some of the threats and some of the dangers. You're probably familiar with them. Hopefully, we'll kick off some new ideas in your head. And as we get to the latter bit, we'll talk about not only some of the things that TCS offers, but more importantly, some of the things that are available as you look to mitigate risk and to build that framework that you have in-house that add to what you're doing today. So with that, I will mention that if you have questions, we do have the question functionality here within Zoom, and we will address those at the end, and I'll be more than happy to do that. So if you would just put questions in that section, and then I'll get to those as we go through the material. So thank you very much, and we'll go ahead and get started. And once again, thank you for being with us today. All right, why cybersecurity is critical, and I think we could probably all come up with a list of a couple of dozen things for this, but at the end of the day, it's protecting your data, right? That is what we're after. We do also want to prevent interventions from outside, whether it's bad actors discovering a way in, whether it's a phishing expedition by one of these folks. But this is really the key we want to do: protect our data, protect our users, and make it as difficult as possible for somebody to get into either of those resources. Okay, this information and some of this is from 2020, 21 through 2022. This particular bit has probably changed even since this slide was created with the data that's a few years old. But the Internet Crime and Complaint Center, IC3, which you'll see us refer as we go through this event today, really analyzes these complaints, what people have turned in, what people have let them know about. And then it emphasizes that the efforts in monitoring how to go forward, how to handle some of these issues. And it does focus mainly on small to medium-sized businesses. It is all applicable to larger companies, of course, but that's where the main focus is. If you want to look at this as we move forward, you've got corporate data breaches, you've got personal data breaches, and then you also have credit card fraud. If you want to look at the business email accounts, accounted for $1.8 billion. Identity theft is $219 million. I would make the argument that is limited to the personal side, of course, but that it is also maybe a little bit in decline as there are larger targets out there on the corporate side of things. And then, of course, you have the credit card fraud and then the investment fraud here as well. So those are sort of the areas that they take a look at, and those are the numbers from a few years ago that we've been provided from IC3. If you want to look at the cyber threat landscape, I don't do a lot of reading of quotes, but this one's probably somewhat justified for us to go through it. Unauthorized software and devices and stressed, distracted workers have expanded the attack surface and left businesses exposed as far as several cyber risks. Small and medium-sized businesses are most vulnerable since they run legacy or outdated systems. In such challenging times, the management teams need to take a strong oversight. So what we take away from this is that it is software that you have on a device that maybe is not corporately approved. We think movie, music, download services, that kind of thing, social media. You've got workers that we've just come out of a tough time the last few years, and they're probably stressed, maybe distracted, maybe they're doing something on social media that they shouldn't be. And that all of those things have created more reason, more risk, more danger, and simply make it easier for the cyber criminals to do what they want to do. Small and medium-sized businesses are especially vulnerable, mainly because they're not putting the money and the time and the effort into it. They make excuses why it would not apply to them. And so they are, in fact, more vulnerable than a larger company who's dedicating more time and resources to avoiding a cyber threat or cyber incident. Right. And you do see that the landscape has changed over time. Hackers and victims are much, much smaller now than they were, 65%. So it is not just government entities. It is not just the tank farm like we had here in Greensboro. It is not just larger school systems like you saw in Mecklenburg County. It is really going down into that sub $100 million and even into the micro businesses with a handful of $1 million revenue on an annual basis. And most of them have not really identified these threats. They don't have a plan in place. They may not have systems in place. They may not have a partner in place. If you follow that through as not logical conclusion, they're also not putting in a recovery plan. If you're not looking for on the front end, you're not going to have a plan to recover on the back end. Okay, and the biggest thing really is that nearly half of them are not informing or training users, not even doing the simplest of the email training that many of you are doing. Again, looking back a couple of years and knowing that this data is even greater, these numbers are even greater today, of the crimes that the IC3 had reported to them, and that's a caveat we'll discuss in a moment, reported to them, $29 million would be described as ransomware and in small businesses. So you have a couple caveats there, like I mentioned. It does have to be adjusted with the fact that it doesn't include lost wages, reputational hits. It doesn't include any of the services you have to put in place or any of the forensic services you have to pay for. This is simply immediate lost revenue. The other pieces are important is that this has to be self-reported. So if a small or medium-sized business does not report this to the FBI, the IC3 does not have any way to know about it. And in those cases, you could probably estimate this number is significantly larger, maybe double or even more than that. And then in the year or two since this has come out, you're looking at even larger impacts. So every 11 seconds, now this ransomware attack could come via email, so you're having a very large batch of these occurring at one time. But every 11 seconds, some entity has an attempt at a ransomware attack take place. Think about your organization. How often do you get something to your mailbox? It's an email that some type of phishing attempt, probably ransomware being the ultimate goal. And now multiply that toward all the people in your organization and imagine how many times that happens just in your companies. All right, so the security really needs to be a priority. And I think for most companies today, it is much more so than it has been. Some of that credit / blame goes to the insurance companies who are in many cases forcing us to become more secure. But you look at the reporting that we see, okay, and people will tell you that cybersecurity is a significant a significant concern. It's a big worry that they have, but at the same time, they're not necessarily planning on a level commensurate with how important they say that it is, right? Like it's really critical, but I haven't really put a lot of effort into it. Right? So most companies, as you see here on the bottom row, most companies are planning to do more. And I say this on a day where a client has been suffered a disaster. They're in a process of going through the disaster recovery with us now. So it is easy to say you're planning. It is more difficult to implement. Right? Many reasons for this, but they really come down to a lack of resources. My internal staff doesn't have time to do it. If I have an external partner like a TCS or someone like us, I really don't want to allocate the funds and the time to that when I may have some other needs that are more critical, even within the IT department. Our position would be that the investment that you make today prevents the loss like my client is undergoing right now. All right. And then some of these, and there really are fairly obvious here, but some of these folks are under constant contact, really, or under attack taking place every day. And you look at finance, and that one does really, really make sense why you want to do that. It's directly accessing money. And I think we all know if we have anyone who works in finance, their biggest concern is losing, obviously, money. Second of all, losing reputation with their client, therefore leading to losing clients. Second, I think healthcare is, in my opinion, maybe more critical. And the reason I say that is if you're getting that PHI, personal health information, there are a number of things you can do with it. The obvious one is to break into the account and find out customer information. The next most obvious thing is to sell that PHI to some other, person out there looking to defraud either the insurance company or go directly to the clients themselves and defraud them in some way. So the classic example that you've heard about, if you've been to any of our events, you've probably heard us give the example, is I take PHI as a as a bad actor. I go in and take that PHI. What I may do with it then is to sell that to another organizations, just like people sell credit card numbers. That second or third party then goes out and can try to sell medical equipment to the patient. Well, the patient isn't going to get their equipment. They may or may not end up paying for it, which would cost them money. But more importantly, they then turn that expense into the insurance company. It becomes insurance fraud. So you can use that patient name and patient information repeatedly, and that that cyber threat actor is able to gain from direct access and defrauding the patient, but then also secondarily and more largely in many cases, they can then defraud the insurance company. Construction is another example. I mean, it's an industry that has been a target for many years in many different ways. If you look at just simply what you see in movies versus what you hear on TV versus you go through the bid process, particularly governmental bids, and what we know about how that works, they are rife and often do not put in security safeguards that they need to. So they're also a huge attack vector for some of these cyber criminals. The legal industry, I think about attorneys and the vast amount of data that they create, the vast amount of data that they store, whether it be depositions, whether it be video, whether it be actually court documents, that can obviously affect the legal company itself, the attorneys directly. The firm then is going to suffer a reputational hit, as well as potentially lose clients, as well as losing face in the court and the confidence of those that they work with. And then manufacturing, many of the same reasons we discussed in construction. You're going to have a department within a manufacturing company tasked with stopping cybercrime, but it is not going to be the focus of that manufacturing organization in many cases. So we want to make sure with our manufacturing clients that we explain why this is an issue, provide them ways to avoid having incidents occur, and then really focus on the fact that they are more vulnerable than many others simply because their history of looking at cybercrime has not been super great. Okay. If you look at some of the challenges that these organizations have, and the reason maybe they don't react as you would hope they would, or as we would hope they would, many of them will say that they're too small and that nothing's going to happen to them. Okay, that only big companies like we hear about, Colonial Pipeline, as I mentioned earlier, being affected. The reality is, and we'll have some statistics later to back this up, is that small business, that micro business in some cases, who think they are too small to be a threat or to be attacked, are exactly wrong, because that is who many of these criminals are going after. Whether it be just a mass email for a phishing attempt, whether it be trying to get in for ransomware. The story that I often tell is another client of mine who was a very small medical practice, $2 million a year in revenue, and they became a target. Somebody clicked on a link that they shouldn't have. All of their data was encrypted and held for ransom. Now, through working with them, we were able to retrieve the data. Everything turned out okay, but they were a target not because they were small, but because they're easier to access and they had less security in place to prevent it. Right. These same organizations will tell you that there is an expense, and they're not wrong. There is an expense to being safe, just like there is with physical security or anything else. The very reason that they become a target is because they're not putting the right amount of money into security, or they'll take the first step. They'll put a firewall in place, which is an absolute necessity, but they won't take the subsequent steps to make sure that they stay safe and that they stay secure. All right. In some cases, it's simply inconvenient, and we know no one loves MFA. No one loves entering a password. I had to enter a password and figure out where it went to get into Zoom today. Right. So no one enjoys that, but there is a direct and inverse relationship between security and convenience, and we have to give up a little bit of that convenience to make sure that we have the security. So one of our challenges as IT and security professionals is making sure that the end user understands it is no longer acceptable to have your password written on a sticky note on your monitor. Okay, how many of us could go out in our environment today and look around and find somebody with a password stuck to the side of their screen? And so we are going to have to give up a little bit of that convenience to make sure that we can become more secure. Right. And then you also you have folks who are just trusting that somebody else is handling it, whether they believe it's internal IT, whether they believe that the firewall is enough. They're talking about antivirus. We'll talk at great length later about the future of antivirus, the next generation EDR and SOC and all of that. But I think if they install antivirus once, it's going to protect them in perpetuity. In fact, even the first generation, even the old antivirus has to be updated on a daily, weekly, monthly, at minimum basis. And the reason is simple. If you're not going to be looking for the current threats, you're never going to be able to stop them. The other issue with the old school antivirus is, by its very definition, it's not going to find those files until they already exist in your environment. So those are the other reasons we want to make sure that we're moving on from old school antivirus. And even if you have it, that we're keeping it as up to date as possible so that you can avoid any of these issues. As we look at the different types of attacks, this is just what we were speaking about. We've all heard of these organizations, Target maybe being the most well-known amongst these, Equifax certainly being another one that had breaches, and we've all heard about. But that's not really who the target is for the majority of these cases. So they're talking about Main Street. It is the small and medium-sized businesses that are overconfident, like we discussed. They're also bearing the brunt of the cyber attacks. Just numerically, they're more there than there are at the larger company, simply by nature of the fact that there are so many small businesses under that $100 million a year threshold. The other component that's affecting the entire world, not just IT and not just smaller companies, is that with more remote work, more devices being brought from home, more devices being joined to your network, you are seeing that whatever you bring in with you begins to affect the entire organization. So, do you use your work computer for social media? Do you use your work computer to download music, download movies? Do you have kids who are gaming, or are you gaming on your work computer? There are ways to secure against all of these things, but it doesn't happen very often. So as people continue to bring their own devices, as people continue to work from home, we need to take into account how do we protect that with a VPN, whether it's at home, whether it's at Starbucks, whether it's sitting on the beach working, whatever it may be. So those are things to keep in mind, because you don't want to make the job of that cyber criminal easier. Okay. As you do look to protect your organization, it is sometimes good to think about it as a team sport. Right. And what I mean by that is, it is not just the IT department. It is not just management's responsibility. It is not just the end user who's always to blame. It is, in fact, the entire group, and possibly outside providers. If it is a company like TCS that you're partnering with, if it is a firewall that you're bringing in, if it is a company that provides you, some kind of software, we have to work with them. It is certainly the cloud vendors that we work with that have to all be involved. This is a group effort. And it is going to take all of us working together. And the reality is, as we see in this article headline here, it is more and more difficult to find people and to fill jobs today than it has been. And often you are seeking outside help. You are seeking outside software or providers, or you are looking to train people inside. So it's got to be that team sport that we reference. Okay. If we look at data, you have responsibility for the data owner. Obviously, your organization owns the data that you produce, and there's responsibility there. You have your IT department, and that's your first line of defense internally. It is their job to make sure that they protect and they safeguard and they look out for your data internally. And then you have the information security industry. That includes TCS companies like ours, as well as the manufacturers, and as well as the cloud vendors that you're using. So we do have to work together and sort of walk hand in hand to make sure that we can have an environment that is safe for everybody. Okay, I will go just briefly over this. It's a great checklist. And if anybody wants to take a screenshot and look at it later, discuss it later, we certainly can. But you want to take a look at some of the ways that you really can manage your risk internally. All right. The first one begins with a security assessment. It is something that the companies like TCS provide. Many of you have probably had one. You may have had one recently. Certainly, we can update those as we go. We want to make sure that you've got some spam filtering. We've got your products that we use. There are a number of them out there. You may be using yourselves internally, but make sure you're doing something to eliminate as much of this as you can before it hits the user's desk. We talked about password. It used to be you have a password that was all 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we had to have 6 characters, 8 characters, 12 characters. All we're really looking to do with a password is to make it difficult to access that machine, that application, that cloud service. And at the end of the day, it's about making it harder for that threat actor to gain access to the point where they go to the one next door. It's just like why you put the alarm on your house, right? You just want them to go next door and try to harass your neighbor because you do have that security in place. And it's no different in the cybersecurity field. Security awareness. Now, this is the training you provide your end users. A lot of this comes in the form of your email training. So they'll look out for spam. They'll look out for different ways to misspell the company name using letters and numbers. Looking out for the concept of you're putting something in place through a ransom attack, through a phishing attack that sits there and logs keystrokes, or it sits there and forwards mail. The mail forwarders to learn the voice of the CEO. What does the email sound like? What does it sound like? How does he sign off? And then you can send that and ask somebody to pay a bill or to wire an amount or to buy gift cards, whatever the current scam is going on. So that security awareness for the end users is going to be critical. Advanced EDR, we'll talk about that a bit more later, but that endpoint protection is critical and becoming more and more critical. Using MFA, again, we mentioned earlier, nobody loves it, but it is absolutely more secure than what we're doing. Shows up if you're trying to get your cable company to get access to that. Your cell phone records in some cases. We're seeing it all over, and it certainly is critical to access your business systems. Staying updated. One of the services TCS provides, and perhaps to some of you, is patching and management and updating and automating that, so you don't have to see it every day. Happens in the background, but you make sure everyone is updated, whether it's PCs or whether it's servers. Dark web research. Now, we've all heard about the dark web. What does it mean? We'll get into a couple of examples later, but certainly it is out there. It is real, and there are cases where it can affect you. SIM logging is another big one, to make sure we're managing those logs. And you do have to have a tool to do that, because the amount of logs created today is absolutely astronomical. Your gateway security. You want to make sure that the edge is secured. You want to make sure data going in and out is going where it should be. You're only coming in from where it should be. Mobile device security, more and more important every single day. Our cell phones can do as much as computers were doing a few years ago. Tablets today are really all over the place. I mean, you can't go anywhere without seeing someone using a tablet, all the way from a business use like you may have to your server at a restaurant providing your bill electronically. Firewall, we mentioned earlier, it's absolutely critical. It's one of the first things that needs to be done. But it cannot stop there, and you have to make sure it is updated and kept current also. Encryption, whether it's email encryptions, data encryption, encrypting laptops to make sure that they're left at a cab, dropped off a bridge, whatever happens while people travel, that they're going to be safe. And then, of course, we get to backups. As I gave you my example earlier, I think we need to make sure that everyone not only is backed up, but that we're testing that. And then as we go forward and we get into a disaster situation, we're able to recover quickly and completely. I mentioned the dark web a moment ago, and again, everybody who watches TV has some nebulous idea of what this is and what we're talking about. A great way to think about it is the iceberg analogy, and we use that a lot in different areas. But what we see, the Googles, the news, sports, ESPN, all that kind of stuff. Everyone who's not really in this industry thinks that's it, right? We do understand if we work in IT, that there's so much more that gets stored other places, that the databases that you can't see, the records that you're not able to access without proper login. A lot of your reporting and your really back-end data that is out there, but nobody can get to with the right sort of knowledge link and then access. This all accumulates to about 96% of the content that is out there. And then you have that dark web, that third piece down there, where you really get into illegal activities, the selling of the data, and some pretty unsavory stuff. So that's the level we really want to focus on, trying to deny people access to and prevent people from getting to. You think an example here, obviously, is the stolen credentials. They may get stolen, and then this is where they would turn on. The PHI example later would be turned around here and sold to someone. All right. You want to, as we talk about here, as we go further, sort of the same part of the process. So there's the acquisition, and then there's the turnaround and the sales level. Interesting here, it says 200 days is the average length that you know before you've had a breach. Okay, so it may take 200 days to know that anybody's even been in your system who's not supposed to be. All right. So that's kind of the key to remember here, understanding that the data that we see is only the tip of this iceberg, but we've got to protect that to deny access to everything that is under the waterline. All right, so there are companies that are out there who provide, and you probably run them yourselves. You can certainly do the simple version for free on the internet, but then there are much more in-depth work that can be done, and that's something where a company like TCS can come in, providing you some reporting to show what's out there, what you'd be surprised if you haven't looked at yet. What password information is available, what you can find. Run this to people in your company, just even one of these free versions, and show them, is this really yours? Here's what it is. Here's what your password looked like. Well, I found this on publicly available internet for free. And so that can be somewhat sobering for people sometimes, but it definitely lets them know that that's a possibility when they may not have considered it before. You see here another bit of information from IC3. Almost 20,000 business emails were compromised that were reported, and the losses thereof were $1.8 billion, again, that they were notified of. So figure how many more times than the 20,000 reported emails actually occurred. I would suggest many, many times that number, not only because they didn't report it, but in many cases, they just didn't know. I'm sure you can imagine, unless you're looking for an email forwarder, you may not know that it happened. You may not know anybody's looking at your email. You may not know that you've been compromised. That email list has been made public. So I would suggest this is a fraction of the actual number of incidents that have occurred on an annual basis. You want to understand what these challenges are. And in this industry, we probably do understand them. The challenge for us then is relaying that out to our user base. We want to protect the remote workforce, sometimes from themselves. This is more and more critical than it has ever been. We mentioned you're bringing in the mobile devices, bringing in tablets, bringing in your personal equipment. It's also going to be important to make sure that we're fortified and we're securing what happens in the cloud. The easiest example is celebrities and their iCloud accounts and pictures that get released, right? That's what makes the news. The reality is it's someone trying to get into your data that's being stored at a cloud provider, or even at one of your partners that you do software with, practice management for a doctor or an attorney, whether it's in manufacturing, ERP, MRP type software. But you want to make sure that is protected and that is safe, so that you don't have these same issues in the cloud that you were worried about on site. Maintaining compliance. Obviously, if you're dealing with HIPAA in the medical field, this is of utmost critical importance to you. But lots of other areas. Financial is a big one. Legal is another. They have their own sort of compliance issues. And then now we're also facing annual, compliance with cyber insurance from our insurance providers, making sure we can continue to check that box yes to all of these, even as they become more and more strict. And then we all talk about fighting off the cyber threats. It's not so much fighting them off as preventing them, stopping before they get in the door and having to go to the neighbor's house, that kind of thing. And a lot of this is done from the end user training. It really goes back to not clicking on bad links, not posting a sticky note with your password on your monitor. Those are the real things we want to try to prevent. And now it comes to the good stuff. I mean, what does it really cost when this happens? And we said earlier, it's almost 200 days for somebody to understand they had a breach. It is over 300 days really to identify the details, in some cases, contain that breach, and then really see what damage, if any, has been done. And that is something that does affect those smaller $100 million and under companies than it does the Fortune 500 companies. And the reason is simple. The larger you are, the more likely you're going to have tools in place to recognize these things as they happen, the tighter control you're going to have over your data, the tighter the access guidelines are going to be to getting to your cloud data providers or services. And so that's a big key to that. So you look at just a few percentages, about half of the breaches are from a malicious attack. There are lots of other ways you can have a breach, all the way up to someone simply giving away information, but over than half, and I would suggest maybe as we go, this number is going to continue to increase, are from a malicious attack. A lot of times you are getting this personal information. That's what people are after. We talked about the doctor example earlier, where it's not the finance and the credit cards, it's being able to resell that medical information. All right. And in a lot of cases, I would say probably even higher than 53%, there's a financial motivation behind this, though we do know some of it is political. Some people are trying to affect elections. Some people may be trying to affect the reputation of an organization, but still the number one reason is money. All right. So if you look at the average cost per record, that customer personal information, it's $175 per record when you figure out what can be gleaned and squeezed from it. Even anonymized customer data without any specific names in it, it has value. I would think that information, even if you're sanitizing it, is going to have some company information. There's a vulnerability there as well. The record cost in other industries are not as large. Your average goes down a little bit to 162. Then you have intellectual property. What could someone glean from your company? Do you have intellectual property that is the key or the secret sauce, if you will, to what your organization does? We have one client for whom it is almost like Colonel Sanders at KFC. If they lost that recipe, they would be in dire straits because anybody else could then do the thing they do. And so it is as critical as anything else. And then you have executive data, you've got corporate data, you've got accounts and passwords. It's almost an endless list of things that people could profit from and benefit from. All right. So if we want to look at some of these compliance challenges, so we've looked at already at some of the challenges for protecting your data, protecting your network. What are some of the compliance challenges? Okay. It is a moving target. Every year with the insurance example, this goalposts are moved further down the field, but it also changes for HIPAA as it becomes more strict. You look at SOX and some of these other compliance items that you're looking at. The financial world, it is constantly in motion. So it does continue to change. So you need somebody not only to help you understand what those changes are, but to affect a reaction to those changes. We want to educate employees, because just as their passwords have gone from 4 digits to 8 or 12 or even beyond, it is important that they understand through some sort of a training program that the evolution of the threats are getting more and more complicated, more complex, and happening more often. You do want to secure your data, and using a reporting center, using some kind of a security operations center to keep an eye on that for you. You do want to create a strategy for compliance. You want to create documentation. What do you do in case of a breach? What do you do in case of a disaster? And make sure this reporting is in place, and that you go through that on a regular basis and continue to address that, make any changes, and perhaps in the case of a DR situation, you want to practice that and test it. And then you want to make sure that the tools that you use have the same level of compliance and meet the same guidelines that you're responsible for meeting. Okay, one of the ways to do this is with a vulnerability assessment. And a vulnerability assessment differs from a penetration test in that the vulnerability assessment is ongoing, right? You want to go through the process, identify ways to protect your organization, protect that data. You want to protect any problems that might occur. And if something isn't working, make sure that you're going to replace it or update it so that it does work. And you want to respond in a timely manner. So vulnerability assessments happen one time and are constantly updated and repeated. All right. And that's going to allow you to stay current, look for ongoing threats, and it's also going to allow you to recover more quickly if you do have something that occurs. You talk also about persistent threat monitoring. One of the things that you're going to get 24/7 from a security operations center is they're going to sit there and monitor your data in something that looks very much like a Visa call center, multiple screens in front of them. Warnings kick off. They're able to isolate that. Perhaps they even segregate that from the rest of your network. Perhaps they shut a machine off from the network. But they can do these things 24/7, whether you're there or not. Response is a lot faster than someone calling you making a decision, you going to the office and executing it. All right, you can also sustain this. It's not only a one-time thing, but it is 24/7. It's every day, all day. And so you want to make sure you're doing that. It reduces risk, but it also maintains your compliance in many cases. Then there's endpoint protection itself. Begin upper right, again, it mentions having a SOC in place and making sure that we can have that 24/7 monitoring, and that's going to fulfill a lot of the requirements. You defend not only your physical assets, your cloud assets, but the ones that you cannot see, the reputation, the brand, all the things that you put in place, and make sure that you don't have an incident that affects sort of those soft parts of the business. Upper left here, we talk about the EDR, endpoint detection and response. It is part of our offering. It is, I think of it is next generation antivirus. It is very much like radar compared to a rear view mirror when you think of all the old antivirus products that we've been using. It's going to see a potential threat or potential file or potential access as it enters the network and prevent it, rather than having to become resident within the network before it can be found if it's been kept up to date. So it's a vastly superior approach to the old school antivirus. We also want to stop the active threats, and we want to investigate what's going on, where they come from, how do we prevent it, how do we update, and make sure we stop that the next time, and then minimize what's been done now. And then last, you can protect your email through 365 if that's what you're using, other cloud applications, by limiting that access, controlling it, controlling your data, having backups in the cloud of the cloud data, all of these things that are make you better, safer, and stronger. All right. We want to defend simply against the threats. Okay, that's the crux of all of this. We want to put this framework in place to make us more efficient, make us better. One of the things that we talk about here is that a layered approach. It's like bulletproof glass. It's not just the one layer, but it's alternating layers of different substances. And you're going to end up using all of this approach to cybersecurity as well. You want to understand the risk, you secure the data, you want to make sure that you're creating a safe environment as far as the soft costs, the reputational things we talked about. You want to protect the financial and the health records of your employees, certainly of your clients, if you're looking at financial or medical or even legal. And then you want to keep from having all of these compromises, particularly the easy ones through email, that we can stop with training. So that's what we're accomplishing with all of this. That's what our goal should be. And as we go forward, that's what we want to focus here on TCS. Before we look into the questions, I do want to mention, I know some of you have attended one of our Cyber Shield events, and it is our new protection platform, because it's really more than just an application. It is a full solution end to end. It is a platform that it does include a lot of the functionality that goes into this presentation that we've seen today. And I would say, if you haven't seen a Cyber Shield presentation, we do have one that is coming up next month. I don't believe a date has been put out yet, but we're going to do that next month. I would encourage you to sign up and attend that, find out more about what it can do. And the idea is that we've done the legwork. We've gone out and investigated the applications and the offerings and the solutions that are out there. We've seen which ones will work together. We then take the burden of making sure we're updating and keeping them current and keeping the linkages between them functioning as they should. And I want to be sure to understand what the needs are so that we can apply that adequately and appropriately. So take a look at your email as we go. Look for things from us about that next presentation next month. If you have any questions, I know I've got one and it happens to be on CyberShield, so I probably answered that already. But if there's anything else that you have, please let us know. Feel free to contact directly your CSM, contact me, contact one of the guys that you work with on the engineering side, and I'll be happy to answer that. I do appreciate your time with us today, and I look forward to the next time we get together, and hopefully we'll see all of you at the CyberShield event next month. Thank you.